When an incredibly talented and influential artist passes away, they leave behind more than just a legacy of music. Their passing also alters the timeline of events that forever alters the future of the musicscape. Things that could have been will never be. Potential is lost and erased forever. Changes that could have occurred will never play out. As the lifespan of these very talented artists were cut short, and all we are left to do is pick up the pieces and cherish the memories that were left behind. But sometimes, it's fun to ask, what if? What if they never passed away at such a young age? What if our heroes were still alive today? What would they be doing in the year 2024? How different would the landscape of music look today? Would they still be respected, loved, or would they be disliked, or somewhere in between? Would they still have achieved the same level of success that their trajectories suggested they would? Did their deaths ultimately lead to their martyr status? Well, in this video, you can follow along with me as we step into this alternate universe, this alternate timeline where these legends never passed away, but instead are alive today. So in this video, what if they never died?
Check it. Then while we hold gats, you hold knives. When you sold apes, we sold pies. When you roll bikes, we drove fives. There's no comparison, son. Just embarrassing. I'm running with some of the baddest men in the whole New York. We hold the fort while you crap classes holding. Player hating, pushing stolen whips. We at the dice game holding trips. Out of town throwing bricks, taking over. Cooking up coke with baking soda. I buy hot jewels and ice it down. While you go to the jewelry store with short dough trying to bring the prices down. You better.
Yo, when I heard that on tape, I was scared to death.
Yeah.
I said, yo, there's no way I could compete. If this is what I gotta compete with, I said, there's no way.
Big L was supposed to be on an indie label, man, and not really over at.
Right.
They didn't understand him over there, but he was.
In 1995, in Harlem, New York, a 20-year-old freestyle and lyrical rap beast who bore the government name Lamont Coleman, who the hip-hop world knows as Big L, is getting ready to release his debut album, Lifestyles of the Poor and the Dangerous, an album that would introduce New York to a newly supreme, skilled MC who would rattle the conscience of hip-hop lyricists at the time. Big L was a witty, dark, yet vibrant storyteller with an ability to drop witty bars and flow with ease. As the mid-90s progressed, the lyrical style is being pushed to its limits, with many worthy competitors such as Fat Joe, B.I.G., Nas, Wu-Tang Clan, Rakim, LL Cool J, Jay-Z, and even West Coast legend Tupac Shakur took note of this man's immense talents. They even exchanged numbers to maybe later jump on a track together. Everything for Big L was coming together as an up-and-coming talent. Finally, in March of 1995, Big L released his debut album, and it was met with instant critical acclaim from hip-hop heads and critics at the time. With this, it was clear Big L was building an immense buzz and was laying the foundation for what could later spark a lyrical renaissance. By early 1997, with his touring behind him and his many collaborations and connections established, Big L was beginning to be a force to be reckoned with by this time. So he would begin the early stages of work that would later become his sophomore album, The Big Picture. After securing a collab with West Coast legend Tupac, this would later give Big L a cosign that he needed to begin to catch the attention of both coasts. However, February of 1999 would swing around. In our current timeline, Big L is set to be killed in a still unsolved drive-by shooting while walking on the sidewalk near his home in Harlem. However, in this alternate timeline, the murder never happens, and Big L is instead able to continue on with his career. Big L would have to go on to hire bodyguards if he wanted to stay alive, as there is a street life that follows him and shadows him, never far behind him. At the time before his death, Big L was in the process of talking to Dame Dash and Jay-Z about the possibility of being signed. Having won over Jay-Z after defeating him in a freestyle battle, the contract is drawn up and Big L was eventually signed to Rockefeller Records so he could sell some more records and possibly bring money back to his own imprint, Flamboyant Entertainment. However, Not long onto the deal, things began to sour at Rockefeller Records. Big L, notorious for wanting full creative control over the kind of music he makes, finds himself in a tug-of-war with his label, all the while trying to record songs for his debut album with Rockefeller. As even in this alternate timeline, the industry at this point in the early 2000s is heading ever more into clubbier and clubbier songs. Jay-Z tries to talk Big L into making more commercial songs so that he can have a hit like Big Pimpin', but Big L refuses as it doesn't fit his style. Big L's album would later be stuck in recording purgatory, while Jay-Z went ahead and signed new people and focused on them instead. Eventually, by the mid-2000s, with still no release, Big L would negotiate his way out of the contract with Rockefeller Records and begin to drop his own music independently, and he does so very well. While never releasing a chart-topping club song, his dark style would be his biggest challenge to reaching the wider audience. But Big L still manages to build a big enough underground following to eventually land him on weird places like 106 & Park and even TRL. However, he would remain mostly B-list famous as his former label mates Jay-Z and Dame Dash would move on without him. Big L would go on to rock with all the lyricists of his era, including rappers like Cannabis, Nas, LP, Sean Price, R.A. Rugged Man, Royce 5'9", King Crooked, Snoop Dogg, Fabulous, and even make some songs with former label mates by the late 2000s. Through the rest of his career, Big L would find himself still being haunted by his street-related past, and he would often find himself constantly escaping assassination attempts. Big L would also see himself constantly in and out of prison for much of his career, which would stifle his career. Big L would be in and out of prison often in the mid-2000s for various things such as illegal possession of a firearm, probation violations, and battery of one of his former rivals during a nightclub incident. After his release, Big L decides to reform and change his style to something more conscious, and then instead begins to mentor the youths in his hometown of Harlem and teach them the ins and outs of rapping and try to keep them out of trouble. Big L is still alive today and is currently working on a new album, his first in many years, and he's trying to see if he can recapture the magic of his younger days after just turning 50. I figured I would run through a bunch of these together, as these are more recent and they were all under the age of 22. I call them the kids who passed away because they were just kids and they were just getting started. So here's a quick rundown on what they may have been up to as of 2024.
My mom always tells me, like, time will heal everything, you know what I mean? And even if it's like 5 years later and you're still feeling like, where the fuck, like, when I'm waiting for this shit to heal, like, nothing's happening. It's gonna take another, few years, you know what I mean? That shit does take time in some situations.
Rapper Lil Peep was a rising star and was in the middle of innovating a new style of hip-hop that was dubbed emo rap. He would blend punk and rock influences into his music and would connect with those facing the same demons as him. His music had him always referencing his drug problems and bouts with depression. His music showed a more emotional and vulnerable side and attracted many fans who connected with his message. And he'd built himself a cult following. The star was rising with Lil Peep, born Gustav Elijah R. His bouts with depression and drug addiction eventually would catch up with him. And one fateful day, tragedy struck.
Fans are mourning the loss of up-and-coming rapper Lil Peep. Tucson police say 21-year-old was found dead on his tour bus before a show at The Rock in central Tucson last night. Authorities say Lil Peep could have possibly overdosed on Xanax. News 4 Tucson, Zach Briggs has been following this story all day. He joins us now from the concert venue. Zach?
His bouts with depression and drug addiction eventually caught up with him. Rapper Lil Peep passed away on November 15th, 2017, from a Xanax and fentanyl overdose. He was found unresponsive in his tour bus before his concert in Tucson, Arizona, and he was pronounced dead at the scene. But in this alternate timeline, he is instead caught just in time by his management team and is able to be taken to the hospital, and Narcan is given to reverse the effects of his overdose. After his near-death experience, Lil Peep would agree to undergo treatment for his drug addictions. However, being so young, only 21, it would mean that he would likely still have an uphill battle and would find himself relapsing time and time again. This eventually leads to arrests and probation violations, which would send him straight to the slammer, where Lil Peep would keep his spirits up by writing more music and connecting with his fans. Once released in his mid-20s, Lil Peep would go on to continue his career and completely clear himself of his former demons. Emo rap would become a much bigger part of Gen Z and Gen Alpha hip-hop, that the charts would be littered with Lil Peep and XXXTentacion wannabes and copycats. Lil Peep would eventually go on to gain significant success and win the award for Best Rap Male Performance at the VMAs, and would stand tall in front of the award show crowd and show his 5-year sobriety coin. He'd eventually go on to work with Helping the Youth with Addiction. Lil Peep is set to drop his next album in 2025 with a slightly more introspective sound to his music and less doom and gloom of his earlier works. Entering a new stage of his life, and sobriety changed him for the better.
My message to the youth is to be strong no matter what you're going through. If you need help, seek help. Whether if you don't want professional help, seek help, and surround yourself with people that'll help you, that'll listen to you, that got your best interest. Whatever you want to do in life, find something that you don't mind doing for the rest of your life. Find something that you like. And even if it seems like it's impossible, it's very, very possible. So don't get nervous. If you have a big goal, just chip away at it until you get to where you need to be.
Instead of passing away from an overdose-induced seizure on December 8th, 2019, let's explore an alternate time where Juice WRLD survives the overdose and is successfully treated by the medical staff. Juice WRLD would likely be the biggest chart-topping rapper out today, working with artists of various genres, even those outside of hip-hop. Juice WRLD would go on to release more music and eventually evolve out of hip-hop and fall into a more pop emo sound, much like his contemporaries, like Lil Peep and XXXTentacion. However, Juice WRLD would find it much harder to get out of his drug addictions, as the level of fame he was reaching was constantly rising, and one of the worst things that can happen to an addict is to get more money and more success and be surrounded by yes men. It would allow easy access to illicit drugs. Eventually, he would find himself getting help for some of his collaborators who were either trying to get sober or had experience in this matter. Juice WRLD would eventually agree to check himself into rehab, but keeping him from relapsing would be a challenge. Rapper Eminem, who was collaborating with Juice WRLD, would eventually reach out to him and help him beat his addiction. As of 2024, Juice WRLD declares 4 years of sobriety and is preparing to release another album in the fall.
Speaking way too much and saying the wrong but right things in a very abrupt but loud way, then I'll go to literally saying nothing and being very scarce with my words and saying very little and it meaning a lot. So as far as my persona, it's everything to me. I guess you could say literally everything to me, because without a persona you're nobody. If you don't have a personality, you're nothing. I'm still a real person. I still have emotions. I still get out of character, but
XXXTentacion, born Jose Onfroy, was a rising star in the dark, gritty emo rap scene. Many credit him for innovating the style, and he found a large following after releasing music on the infamous SoundCloud platform. He was slowly gaining a buzz and a following and building up to a very spectacular career, and most impressively, all of this before the age of 20. However, like most youth with his set of circumstances, Jose had a very rough upbringing, from poverty to having an unstable home growing up. All of this would eventually become a muse for his most emotionally charged music. As a young man, he would also find himself running into young man type of problems. It would later lead to many run-ins with the law. Upon his release, XXXTentacion would try to reform himself and he only wanted to change for the better. However, his life was cut short on June 18, 2018. XXXTentacion was shot and killed in an armed robbery in front of a motorcycle shop in Deerfield Beach, Florida, ending the young man's life and career before it ever really got started.
Developing right now, a search for a killer in South Florida after an up-and-coming rapper is shot dead. 20-year-old XXXTentacion killed in an apparent robbery. Police say the artist, whose real name is Jahseh Onfroy, was leaving a Broward County motorcycle shop yesterday when he was shot by two men who ran up to his car. He was rushed to a hospital but did not make it. Onfroy's death comes just weeks after he earned his first #1 album, which debuted March 31st.
But in this alternate timeline, XXXTentacion is instead still alive and with us as a 26-year-old inmate at New York Correctional Facility. His troubled youth and many enemies would constantly hound him. Jahseh, never being one to back down from a fight and still being so young, would always oblige, thus finding himself in more and more trouble. Many attempts would be made on his life throughout his career, and his long simmering tensions with Drake due to allegations of Drake copying him would eventually boil over into a much bigger feud.
Being like, you took this kid's flow or whatever, right? So I'm just like, yo, what's happening to me right now, you know? So I'm sitting there, I'm trying to read, like, figure out who they're talking about. I find out who they're talking about. I go.
The extension guy.
I don't even think that's how you say his name. But yeah, that's
I tried to practice.
They call him
extension.
X. Yeah. So anyway, I go and I find what song they're talking about, you know? And I listen to it. I'm like, okay, I see where people could draw like this comparison off of like the first two lines, whether it be the cadence or the rhyme pattern or whatever, you know. And I'm just like, yo, it's crazy that people think that after all this time, after all I've been through, that I'm the type of person to go pre some song that's on SoundCloud. It doesn't have like 2 plays. It has plays, you know, he has his cult following, and go and think that I'm gonna like take that and make it my own. Like, I'm not stupid. I'm not like a person like that, you know? So it just...
How's it feel to be at the top of the game now?
Diss tracks would be exchanged, and everything would come to a head when Drake would get jumped and robbed outside of a New York City nightclub after a performance. The men responsible would later be identified as hardcore XXXTentacion stans, as his music would have evolved from a cult following to a hardcore set of stans that would carry a reputation, while Drake, with his team of ghostwriters, was able to defeat XXXTentacion in a battle in the eyes of rap fans. The robbery and subsequent threats to each other's lives would make them both very paranoid, and XXXTentacion would later be arrested on weapons charges, which would stall his career and allow copycats and imitators to take over what would have been a spotlight reserved for him. As of 2024, the game is flooded with so many imitators that XXXTentacion has a ways to go to reclaim the sound and spotlight that was once reserved for him. He plans to release new music once he gets out, but for now, he waits patient for his release, currently set for June 16th, 2026.
You know, I want when they see me, they know that every day when I'm breathing, it's for us to go farther. You know, every time I speak, I want the truth to come out. You know what I'm saying? Every time I speak, I want to shiver. You know, I don't want them to be like, they know what I'm going to say because it's polite. They know what I'm going to say. And even if I get in trouble, you know what I'm saying? Ain't that what we're supposed to do? I'm not saying I'm going to rule the world or I'm going to change the world, but I guarantee that I will spark the brain that will change the world. And that's our job, is to spark somebody else watching us. We might not be the ones, but let's not be selfish, and because we're not going to change the world, let's not talk about how we should change it. I don't know how to change it, but I know if I keep talking about how dirty it is out here, somebody going to clean it up.
If Tupac Shakur is left alive, the world of hip-hop and the political landscape would look very different today, because even though Tupac was indeed a hip-hop artist and an actor, he was also an activist. And as he would grow in influence, he would eventually leave hip-hop behind, leave acting behind, and eventually become more of a political figure. And in the year 2025, things would look much different.
I've had a gun pulled on me by my limo driver, by police, by everybody. You know what I'm saying? And I better be. You know what I'm saying? I've been attacked. You ain't read the papers about these skinheads trying to blow up black churches. Why? They see me as the enemy just like y'all do. You know what I'm saying? They can come to my house and sit outside my house just like anybody else can. A skinhead. And once my life is gone, it's gone. Can't nobody give it back to me. Not the judge, not the president, not the governor, not Calvin Butts, not Jesse Jackson. They can't do nothing but come to my funeral and talk pretty about how black people suffer.
In 1997, Tupac Shakur would find himself getting arrested and being sentenced to jail yet again. Being unable to escape the gangster limelight that Suge Knight surrounded him with, the problems would continue until Tupac would smarten up to leave the label behind. This would be a lot easier said than done, since there's a lot of gangster element to the business and how Suge Knight runs it. As Tupac was a very wild youngin', only at the age of 25 he would find himself yet again in young man problems. However, he would eventually be sent back to prison for assaulting members of a rival gang outside of a New York City recording studio. This time in prison would help Tupac grow spiritually and as a man, as he would be unsafe in the streets. This, of course, would cause the beef between him and Biggie to die down because Tupac is in prison. It would take all the wind out of his sails and he would reevaluate his life coming out. Biggie would eventually leave Bad Boy Records and start his own record company, and eventually the beef would just die off. In the years after the beef, Tupac would eventually step back from the mic and step more into his acting chops. As the hip-hop scene began to get more and more clubby and less gangster, Tupac would change his style to that of a more conscious MC, thanks to his pairing with Nas for their Death Row East collaborations. Tupac left Death Row Records in 1998 as Suge Knight would spiral and not be able to stay out of prison as well. As the years go by, the Notorious B.I.G. would go on to leave Bad Boy in 1999 and form his own label and start to sign many R&B acts and rappers. Biggie slowly starts to become less of a rapper and more of a businessman and entrepreneur and a label executive. By the mid-2000s, Tupac would be released from prison and begin speaking at college campuses and African American gatherings. By now, Tupac is becoming more of a respected political figure, and he is reintroducing the world to the Black Panthers, forming a new political party with a new chapter of the Panther Party. This would create a platform where Tupac would channel his disdain for racial injustices in society, call for an end to police brutality, and it would make him public enemy number one to the conservative movement. Tupac would join and lead social justice protests that would eventually lead to riots across the country. One particular instance would fuel the rage of many after another police officer would find his charges dropped by a judge in what many would see as a misjustice. Tupac would find himself as a political but polarizing figure, with much time spent in jail on and off as a result of his protests, but whose influence would ultimately drive many younger demographics to the voting booth and would impact the country in a very powerful way. With many gathering by the tens of thousands to watch him speak in public, Tupac Shakur would eventually be arrested for allegedly inciting riots, and his followers would cry foul. The FBI would attempt to eliminate Tupac several times, much as they did with Dr. King. Tupac would remain locked up for years, as some in the right-wing public would deem him a menace who was inspiring riots, while others would see him as a hero and a martyr. Tupac would be charged for inciting riots and spend even more time behind bars while still writing to the public from inside his cell. He would become a philosopher from his cell, writing many books. Tupac would get released in 2020 and would then go on to become a hip-hop mentor and still a public speaker. He would eventually be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2021, as well as the Pulitzer Prize. The world of hip-hop is indeed much different than the one we know of today. If they had only stayed alive, who knows what would have happened? Who knows if this alternate timeline would have ever happened? But sometimes, it's fun to daydream. But the lesson that should be taken is this: the price of taking one life alters and changes the future. The price of one life can change everything.